Members of Council, if you can please take your seats. This meeting is now resumed. Members of Council, this is Rob Rossini's last Council meeting. I would like to call upon the City Manager to come forward to recognize our Deputy City Manager and Chief Financial Officer on his retirement from the City.
So, Rob, I'm going to make you stand. I have these great... Stand. Come on, stand.
You said I am already.
You're not. Take it off, yeah. So, Rob, staff have given me a great set of notes, and they actually review a ton of accomplishments. And I'm going to be frank, I actually take those accomplishments for granted. I actually know that in 5 years of service to the City of Toronto and your many years earlier of service to other less worthy municipalities, you have accomplished an enormous amount.
Won't like that.
And you've given excellent advice and implemented policies at the direction of council. I'm actually going to take it for granted that you've accomplished an enormous amount. What I think I really want to talk to and what I want to emphasize for this chamber at this moment is how you've done it and the value you've brought. And, you know, over the last couple of years, I've got to know you, and I've got to know you well. And I know that you root your values in where you're from. You root your values in your family, and you root your values in honesty and integrity. And it has just simply been fantastic to work with you from that absolute core of value and integrity. And you have combined that with an intelligence and a set of insight and a capacity that means that you are unstumpable in this chamber. That you have had, you know, oh no, I am, because I want to set the bar lower. That you have performed absolutely magnificently. This is not always an easy place to work. You've brought incredible intelligence to our world, policy insight, diligence, a capacity to answer questions. And you've done it in a way that has been incredibly graceful. And one of the things that we recognize, all of us in this chamber, is that we make difficult decisions. We deal with difficult issues. We deal with challenging situations. And sometimes those challenging situations are challenging to us as a group, and sometimes they're challenging to us individually. And Rob, I have seen you, and I know from experience that you have dealt with all of those with an incredible easy grace, with a sense of humor. So what we have is a long and deep and fundamental list of accomplishments. But those are rooted in your core values, who you are as a person, your love of your family. And we know that you're not retiring to run away from us. We know that you are retiring to be with your family. That intelligence and that capacity and frankly that way of doing business that has just been phenomenal. We're going to recognize it in that chamber, but let me emphasize just how much I will miss you.
Thank you.
Now you get your picture taken.
Are we doing something? Well, Madam Speaker, I am still overcome by watching that hug. It's always nice to see that because, you know, that's as it should be between people who are colleagues, whether it be colleagues between and among the elected representatives and public servants or two of our most senior public servants. But I'm still overcome because that pales in comparison to the gesture of affection seen yesterday between Councillor Perks and Mr. Rossini. But I think it may be that Councillor Perks may have been overcome by the fact that, and I was about to say 4 events that had been held to commemorate Mr. Rossini's retirement. He actually corrected me before the meeting started this morning to say it's the 7th. And this is kind of, I guess, what I would call the holy week of City Hall retirements. I've been here 3 years, I've never seen a retirement where there were 7 events held. It's like the guy that sort of invites you to come to his own surprise party. And he says, it's a surprise, but I really hope you'll come. But I really want to just echo what the city manager said. You know, I have had the opportunity to work alongside chief financial officers in big organizations, and I think you all know that along with other senior executives, they are an absolutely indispensable part. You have to keep track, especially in the business we're in where we're dealing with the public's funds. You have to keep track of it. You have to keep close track of it. There's a level of accountability quite properly that's even higher here than it is elsewhere. And so, you know, and that starts and stops with the chief financial officer, the person, and of course Rob had responsibilities that went beyond that, but I think in the end those responsibilities were the most important of many that he had. And I would just say, to echo what Peter said, yes, he was competent, he was dedicated, he was straightforward, he was professional, but he was also easy to work with, pleasant to work with. I sort of, there was an element that, I will be honest with you, at first, when I had the kind of don't worry, be happy answers that came back sometimes, or in the case of Councillor Perks, don't worry as much, if you have to be unhappy, so be it. I think that was kind of the answer. But I was taken aback, but then I realized that was just, you know, sort of Rob's nature, and that was his nature to be pleasant and not to get flustered by what goes on around here, but that was on top of an incredibly competent, dedicated, professional, diligent way in which he did his job. And so I just want to say on behalf, I'm sure, and others may say a word on their own behalf, but on behalf of the City Council and the people of the City of Toronto and all of the other members of the public service, to you again, Robin, I've had the pleasant opportunity to say it in front of your cluster staff and in front of the goodbye occasion the other night, which offends me a little bit because if there have been 7 events, I've only been invited to 3, but never mind. But I just want to say thank you. I mean, we give people these, and I won't read it out because it's sort of like Peter reading out the list of accomplishments. We give these things, and it's all we can give. But I hope you understand these kinds of things are very meaningful, and I hope you'll find a place to put this so that your own family will, you know, be aware, as I'm sure they were the other night, of the high esteem in which you are held by us, and the fact we'll miss you, and the enormous gratitude we have for your contribution over these years, and that you'll come back and visit often.
Thank you. My mother loves you. So after actually 7 events, I'm all speeched out. I really am. So I'm going to keep this short. But I do want to tell a little story. So was it yesterday, the day before, I go to Roxanne, my wife. Went out 7 years. We dated and married 31 years. So we were together 38 years. So I go to Roxanne. I say, so are you going to come to council? And she's humming and hawing. I said, oh, you know, it's going to be like 2.5 hours there and back. And, you know, it's like... No, I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go. Then we have the mayor who's here for 3 times, right? So you know who really loves you, right? So all I have to say, Mr. Mayor, is we got to stop. People are going to start to talk, eh? This is how rumors are started. Anyway, I do. I have no filter sometimes. You guys have experienced it. Only when answering budget questions. That's all. So I just want to say thank you. In my life, I've been blessed with great opportunities, great jobs, but most of all, a great family. My parents came here in the 50s with not much, not knowing the language, and raised myself and my 2 sisters and raised us the right way. And because of that, that's one of the reasons why I'm here. And so I want to thank my family. I want to thank, though, you guys. Actually, I think it was about almost 5 years, because I think it went to council sometime in around October or November, where this council appointed me as the Deputy City Manager, Chief Financial Officer. And I have to thank, immense thanks to Joe Penichetti for recruiting me here and bringing me here and recommending myself to you, and also Cam Weldon, the previous CFO, because I remember having a dinner in March of 2012, And he goes, Rob, you know, I'm retiring. Because Cam and I go way back. And he goes, have you ever thought about coming to the city of Toronto? And my first reaction was like, are you nuts? My wife would kill me. So that night after dinner with Cam, I go back home. I talk to my wife. She says, oh, this is hilarious, Roxanne. You're going to love this. Cam says, would I be interested in coming to the city of Toronto? And I said, and she goes, well, what did you tell him? I said, are you crazy? And she goes, well, why not? And I thought, oh my God. And then that's when this whole kind of process started. So I want to thank council. I want to thank Councillor Ainsley, Councillor Holiday Sr., who was on my hiring committee, the third interview, and Councillor Del Grand. Another funny story, because I do have to set the record straight. Councillor Ainsley said 9, 10 years, but no, because I distinctly remember Councillor Del Grand asking me, this isn't an interview, he goes, in a Councillor Del Grand way. I love you, I really do, because he goes, you gotta be crazy. You wanted to come here to this crazy place for 9 or 10 years. Why are you be so crazy to come here for 9 or 10 years? So I looked at him in the way that I do, and I said, Counselor, if you think I'm coming here for 9 or 10 years, you're crazy. I told him 5 for the record. So I want to thank all the past chairs of Government Management Committee, Councillor Ainsley, Councillor Kelly, Councillor Shiner had a little stint while I was here, and then back to Councillor Ainsley. Thank you for all the support, not just for myself, but for our team in Cluster C and supporting of the initiatives that we bring forward. I want to thank the 2 budget chiefs that I've worked with, Councillor DeGiorgio and Councillor Crawford. You guys were great. Very accommodating and letting people into the house. And yes, you could have fun and be nice even during budget debates. So thank you very much. You guys are truly gentlemen. And of course, I want to thank the mayor. And, you know, without our colleagues here, the deputy city managers and Peter and Joe P. before that, you know, with all the support that everybody's giving me. But really, nothing can happen without the fine men and women 32,000 strong of the Toronto Public Service, count all the agencies. I think we're up 52,000 FTEs, but particularly my team. Without you guys in Cluster C, you know, I keep telling them, I'd just be telling bad jokes. I really wouldn't get much done. So I want to thank all the division heads in Cluster C. I want to particularly thank Teresa, Alex, and Tiffany in my office for all the support. They organize my life, make sure I'm not too late at meetings. So thank you very much, and thank you, and God bless everybody. Thanks.
Thank you. Members of council, we will now review and confirm the order paper. There are 32 items left on the agenda and 9 member motions. City Council has decided to consider the following items as our first and second items of business today. Licensing and standards, item 21.1 on tow truck industry review and recommendations. And Executive Committee item 2731 on further direction to the City Manager on the study of the commuter parking crisis in Toronto. And I've also reviewed a number of urgent motions to be added to the agenda. Take release of member holds. Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to withdraw Members' Motion 3214.
It's page 7.
Sorry, page 7, because the page changes every day. We're going to be working with staff on...
But can you just identify what it is?
Yeah, so it's a Section 37 proposal to make a contribution to the reconstruction of the North York Women's Shelter. We're going to be working with staff on an alternative funding source.
Okay, so on page 7, MM 3214, Councillor Pasternak Well, actually, Councillor Davis, you held the item down. You're okay? Okay, all in favor? Carried. Councillor Fragadakis.
I was wondering if this is the appropriate time to ask for something to be time-specific.
Okay, which item?
It's on page 6. It is item CC 32.8, the Ombudsman Toronto Report, Inquiry into a Complaint about Committee of Adjustment Notice Procedures. I don't require a presentation necessarily from the Ombudsman, but I would like her...
On what page again? Sorry.
6 at the bottom.
Okay.
I was wondering if the Ombudsman could be here for questions after lunch today. And any appropriate staff from the Committee of Adjustment as well.
Okay, there's a timed item for 2 today.
Sorry, pardon me?
I've been told there's a timed item for 2 o'clock today.
Can I make it after that?
Can make it after that?
Yes, I'd like it after that.
Okay.
2 o'clock or immediately after.
All right.
No, it's after.
After. Okay. All right. Okay. All in favor? Carried. Councillor Cressy.
Thank you, Speaker. On page 4, which is LNS item 21.2, City of Toronto recommendations for cannabis, I'm transferring my hold to Councillor Palacio so that he can speak first as the chair when it comes up.
Did you want to release it?
I'm transferring the hold to Councillor Palacio.
Yes, but Councillor Palacio. Pardon? Okay. But it's still held, that's what I mean. It's not being released. All right, okay. Councillor Fletcher.
Yes, Speaker, I hope you will indulge me with this. We are holding Toronto Fire Services Operation Recruit Class 2017. That's CD 22.12 for 2 o'clock. And I am holding that, it was made time specific. I'm prepared to release that, but I need to replace that with ED 23.7, as Councillor Thompson has asked that we deal with that on an urgent basis today.
That's the deal. It's the third item.
It's the third item. That's okay.
Okay.
It's not really there. We may go, who knows where we could go today.
So, hold on. So, Councillor Fletcher,
yes.
You are releasing CD 22.12, correct?
On the basis that I can replace that, Speaker.
Yeah.
With council. I'll release it. I'll release
What number,
that.
Polly?
It's 22.12.
First release it, and then we'll talk.
I'm quick releasing it.
Yeah, okay.
Done.
On page 3. Okay, please. Quiet, please. I can't hear. Okay, Councillor Fletcher, page 3, CD 22.12, Toronto Fire Services, you're releasing, correct?
Yes.
On favor? Carried. All right.
No, Glenn.
So
I would ask council, and I know Councillor Fregadakis has put that item at 2, but I would ask that, with the indulgence of council, that 2 o'clock item, which we took into account for that, would be replaced with ED 23.7. Okay, I'm putting it in for 2 o'clock time.
okay, on favor?
Thank you, Councillor
Thank you.
Thompson. I should have.
Mayor Tory.
Yes, Madam Speaker, with the briefest of comment, I'd like to release TE 26 on page 6, TE 26.67 and TE 26.68. The comment is only to say that I'm going to be taking up with the people I meet with at the Road Closure Coordination Committee this extension of these permits, because I think we can't get into the habit of having them extended long. But in the case of these two, which are seeking extensions quite lengthy, they don't close a lane of traffic. They narrow the lanes, and so I think we can. I can release those, but I will be taking up this matter with the staff. So.
But 2669 you're not releasing.
26.67 and 26.68.
Yeah, and 2669 you're leaving.
Yes, for the moment.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, on page 6, T 2667 being released. construction staging area for 40 Wellesley. All in favor? Oh, recorded vote.
The item carries 31-4.
On page 6, T2668, construction staging area for 50 Wellesley. Recorded vote.
Councillor Palacio, please, and Councillor Mihevik, please.
Councillor DiGiorgio, please. Councillor DiGiorgio.
The item carries 30-5.
Thank you. Councillor Bailao.
Yes, Madam Speaker. On page 3, EX 27.17, authority for the city to take part in province's Home for Good program, 90 million allocated to Toronto. I'd like to release that and have a recorded vote.
It's here without a recommendation.
And I'm moving the report, the supplementary report.
So you're moving the supplement?
It was circulated first day of council.
Yes. Okay, on page 3, EX 2717, Councillor Bailao is moving the supplementary report on the authority for the city to take part in the province's Home for Good program.
Recorded vote?
Recorded vote.
Councillor Davis, please. Thank you. Councillor Matlow.
Councillor Grimes, Councillor Mihevik, please.
The motion carries unanimously, 36 in favor.
Okay. Councillor Doucette.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good morning, everybody. On page 5, NY 24.42, I have a motion that City Council deny the request for to permit the removal of one private tree. This is to support the staff recommendation, and the local council has asked me to do a recorded vote on this one, please.
Okay, on page 5, James. NY 2442, application to remove a private tree. Did somebody say hold?
No, they just want to make sure it's a recorded vote, and I still have a microphone.
Sorry?
So how is everyone today? Doing well? Good.
Recorded vote.
Councillor Wong-Tam, please.
Councillor Palacio, please, and Councillor DiCiano, please.
The motion carries 26-10.
Councillor Wong-Tam.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. On page 6, TE 26.124, endorsement of events for liquor licensing purposes, I'm prepared to release that. I recognize the clerks have said there's no other additions to that.
Okay. Page 6, T 26.124, Councillor Wong-Tam is releasing. Recorded vote.
Councillor DiCiano, please.
Councillor Thompson, please, and thank you.
The item is adopted 35 to 1.
Councillor Aljamari.
Speaker, on the front...
Oh, sorry, Councillor Wong Tam has another.
Sorry, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. On page 7, MM 32.22, request for a report on the hours of operation and maintenance of privately owned public spaces. I've had a chance to speak to our acting chief planner, as well as Councillor Matlow, Councillor Grimes, and Councillor DiCiano. We're all good, ready to release that.
On page 7, MM 3222, request for report on hours of operation and maintenance of privately owned public space. Councillor Wong Tam is releasing. Recorded vote.
Councillor Mihevc, please.
Councillor McMahon, please, and Councillor Shiner.
The item carries unanimously, 36 in favor.
Councillor Aljamari.
Speaker, on the front page, the welcome to City Hall, to City Council, under follow the meeting online, bullet point number 6, Rogers TV, there is no longer a live broadcast on Cable 10, so that should be removed. It doesn't exist anymore.
Okay, it was an error in there, and the staff are going to correct it. Thank you.
Does that mean Giorgio will give fewer speeches?
Councillor DiCiano.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. LS 21.1, tow truck industry review and recommendations. I've spoken to staff. I can release that, and I believe the chair has a minor amendment on the issue. Page 4, LS 21.1, tow truck industry review and recommendations.
Councillor Holliday, it's a timed item. It's the first item we're dealing with. No, Councillor Holliday wants to hold. Yes, thank you. Councillor Ainsley.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. At the bottom of page 3, Government Management Committee meeting number 22, 22.36, request to revise the Ontario Provincial Offences Act. I can release that.
Who said hold? Okay, continue holding it in your name?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, so we'll hold it. Councillor Robinson.
Madam Speaker.
Okay. Councillor Robinson.
Yep. Thank you. Top of page 5, PW 23.12, utility locate services for business improvement areas as required by the Ontario One Call. I have a motion that I think serves everybody's purpose. If the clerks just could put it up. I've also spoken to Tabia about this, who's the head of the BIAs, represents all the BIAs, and this will call for a report back on the options to address this issue. Just so you, Councillor Davis, we've been working in transportation on this issue for about a year and a half, which we talked about on the first day of council.
Okay, I think
Councillor Thompson's aware of it. Everybody's
I think
in the
we're I think we're okay with it. Okay, on the top of page 5. Yes, recorded vote. PW 23.12, utility locate services for BIAs. Councillor Robinson is moving the amendment, well, on the screen. It's here without recommendation, so recorded vote.
Councillor Cressy, Councillor Mihevc, please. Councillor Palacio, please. And Councillor Robinson, please.
The amendment carries unanimously, 36 in favor.
All those in favor of Oh, hold on. Councillor Cressy.
Yes, this is urgent because the AGCO hearing is before the next council meeting.
On favor, carried. Councillor Matlow.
I move the following motion. I think it's evident why it's urgent.
Okay. On favor, carried. Who's next? Okay. All those in favor of adopting the, oh, hold on. Councillor Shiner, yes?
There's a motion that staff gave me that they said was
It's not ready. I'm sorry, I don't know. That's not ready.
Do it at lunchtime.
Okay. All those in favor of adopting the order paper? Carried. So we'll go to the first item of business this morning, which is on page 4, LS 21.1, tow truck industry review and recommendations. Questions to staff. Please put your name up. Questions to staff. Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Speaker. I think I only have one, and if I could ask through you to the Executive Director. In the report, it talks about a 5-kilometer, essentially a perimeter around the city, which is a zone that if a vehicle is towed and dropped outside of, there's no charge to tow over that 5 kilometers. But I noticed that the recommendation changed between your report and the committee and coming to council. And I wondered if you could just provide comment or some explanation on the policy rationale to what you had mentioned in your report, and any thoughts on where the committee has changed that, or any rationale why the committee has changed that.
Through you, Madam Speaker, initially we felt that that initial 5 kilometers may be reasonably reflected in the revised rate that we proposed. That was also when we were considering a range of rates for the accident tow proper. During committee, we heard deputations, and I think some very fair comment about the industry having to absorb that 5 kilometer, that it ought to start once, if only in the cases where they are towing not to a CRC, but outside of the city,
okay,
that the rate.
I'm sorry, one moment. Please, members of council, Councillor Al-Jamari, Fletcher, McMahon, Pasternak, Ainsley, yes. De Bearmaker. Thank you. Okay, continue.
So, through you, Madam Speaker. So at committee, it was in recognition of the deputations asserting that where the regulated rate for the City of Toronto, they're taking it beyond the boundaries, that really that kilometrage rate ought to start at the boundary of the city, that 5 kilometers was somewhat arbitrary.
So I see, in light of the deputations and the information that you've received since then, you're supportive of that change?
Yes, sir, we are.
Thank you kindly. That's all I wanted to ask.
Thank you. Councillor Palacio, questions?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, I do. And Ms. Cook, and during the deputations, the committee, there were a number of submissions, and from the industry as well as from the public, in terms of with some additional recommendations, where in the wisdom of the committee, those were referred to you for you to review and to report to City Council with a supplementary report if needed. So I want to thank you for going through. And so we have a set of recommendations within the supplementary that is an add-on to the original recommendations. And do you mind just to elaborate on that?
So through you, Madam Speaker, we were asked to go back and review the various rates that we had put forward, including the amount of the recovery rate considering any waiting time that may occur prior to a tow truck entering the CRC, as well as a number of other items. We did report back on our findings through the supplementary, where we, including on the private property tows as well. So the supplementary report does provide a couple of additional recommendations or amendments dealing with the rate on private property to ensure that it aligns with the Toronto Police Service contracted tow rates, which are subject to a competitive process, and felt that that was a good standard to adhere to. We've also added some clarifying language around the insurance provisions in the bylaw, just to ensure that they align with the provincial statute. The other items around recovery rate, we did not feel comfortable at this point making any recommendations on how to calculate that differently than the up to $100 we've proposed for recovery services required beyond a regular tow. And that's pretty much the summary of those items.
Thank you. Two additional questions that hopefully that your explanation will bring clarity to members of council and also to the industry as it relates to recommendation 21 in regards to the size and weight of the tow trucks. Now, that's been one of the concerns from the industry. Yesterday, we had a lengthy discussion with your staff and with other interested members of council, including the mayor's office, to bring some different language to the whole thing. And would you be kind to speak on those changes to that recommendation and how simple that's going to be?
Certainly. So currently and historically our tow truck bylaw has not prescribed a minimum weight for the tow truck vehicle itself. We did hear through the consultations concerns raised by the Toronto Police Service to, the tow trucks need to be appropriately sized for the type of vehicle it's towing and the service that it's providing. So that does vary. Our initial report aligned with the Toronto Police Service contract and their requirement for minimum tow truck vehicle weights, as well as those weights that are reflected in other municipalities. Though we have some unique situations in the City of Toronto, notably private parking tows out of underground garages, where that the input we received, and additionally through the letters from the industry that came to council, that may preclude a certain segment of the tow truck industry from providing those services. So we're recommending that we amend that recommendation simply to state, instead of imposing a minimum vehicle weight for the tow truck itself, that we have an amendment that requires that the tow truck be the appropriately sized tow truck for the type of vehicle that it is towing in the circumstance. So we feel that that will accomplish the goal instead of imposing a minimum weight requirement on the tow truck itself.
And that will reflect the discussion that took place at the provincial level throughout the tow truck industry review, where they didn't touch that aspect in terms of weight. And I'm referring to the 250 tow trucks, the smaller ones that will allow accessibility to places that are very congested, like underground garages, as you mentioned, or places like with substandard laneways, for example. So that would clarify that aspect.
So certainly, and we do, through you, Madam Speaker, we do know that the province is continuing to review standards related to tow truck vehicles vis-a-vis safety markings, et cetera, which was another item that we were asked to review and report back on in the supplementary. So we feel that the imposing of a minimum vehicle weight for the tow truck industry was not intended to preclude any current operators, but we do need to make sure simply that they are using the appropriately sized truck for the work that they're doing, and I feel that that amendment should meet our needs.
My last question, in terms of the second recommendation that we spoke about yesterday, and it has to do with the harmonization of rates between accident highway tolls and private tolls as well. You are recommending $250, and that's the main recommendation within the report. But for you to look into it once again, to consult with the industry and come back in a year's time after we do some checking perhaps with other jurisdictions.
So through you, Madam Speaker, certainly the issue of the regulated tow rate in the event of accident tows and private property tows has been one of the bigger issues for the tow truck industry. The last time City Council amended those rates was in 2006. So we undertook a significant amount of consultation, and naturally we heard from participants in the industry who would like a higher rate. We heard from the industry, insurance industry and stakeholders that more of a reasonable rate, but everybody agreed that there ought to be a rate reflective, more reasonably reflective of the work that's being done in order for the tow truck operators to be fairly compensated.
That was your last question.
Yeah, in that range, we landed on proposing a $250 for accident tow rate, harmonizing what we currently have between a city street and a highway to one rate because it's the same risk for the industry. We applied inflationary increase plus to arrive at the $250. It is certainly something I think that's worthy of ongoing dialogue with the industry as we continue to be involved in the regulating of this particular rate.
Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to staff. Good morning. Very quick question. I've been getting some concerns from the tow industry that with some changes that we're making, tow vehicles, tow truck operators will not be able to go underneath in buildings like apartments and low rises for them to be able to give a boost to tow cars. One of our operators was telling me that if something were to happen at City Hall, we'll have to push the car and then we'll have to be winched up. Can you make some comments on that, please?
Certainly. So through you, Madam Speaker, Councillor Karygiannis, we did just actually discuss that issue. It was raised by the industry, and I believe there may be some amendment coming in respect to that recommendation. So we will not be suggesting a minimum gross vehicle weight for the tow truck itself, but rather a requirement that the truck used is appropriately sized for the work that it's doing, and that should alleviate the issue of the smaller trucks to deal with our dense urban environment.
So are we going to have, let's say, a certain amount of the smaller trucks to be able to get underneath? Are we going to designate areas where smaller truck operators can work at, like downtown? Mind you, there's no more downtown. Everybody has high rises now. Are we going to be taking that into account? Like, is there going to be a number that we're going to be working with the industry, stakeholders meetings? Like, I'm sure that you've talked to them. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
Yeah, so through you, Madam Speaker, we certainly are not going to be getting into the business of regulating what trucks go where. The amendment that we are making is simply that the tow truck that's being used needs to be appropriately sized for the work that it is doing. Mostly focused on, we don't want a very undersized tow truck pulling a vehicle that's far beyond its maximum weight capacity. That's really the intent there. So certainly that should alleviate any barriers or concerns for the industry that we are precluding any of the smaller tow truck operators from operating.
Would you be able to sort of give us, through the chair, an indication, how many tow trucks we got and how many of them would be able to do this work, to be able to go underground? Like, is there a ratio, like 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 5 to 1?
So through you, Madam Speaker, we know we license just over 1,000 tow trucks. We do not capture the size or weight or scale of the tow truck. There's no differentiating. That's left in the industry's hands to determine the appropriate size of vehicle for them to undertake their work.
So the only thing then that you're going to be looking to regulate is if a tow truck is, let's say, carrying a bus. It's not it's not a small tow truck, but is able to carry the load that's behind them.
Yes, through you, Madam Speaker. Certainly when we did make the initial recommendation to impose a minimum vehicle weight on the tow truck vehicle itself, it was to address those safety concerns that may arise and have arisen where a tow truck that's too small for the vehicle it's towing can cause a safety issue. So the amendment that I think we're seeking is going to address that, to ensure that the tow truck vehicle used is appropriately sized for the work that it's doing, and we feel confident that that will address those safety concerns.
Thank you.
Councillor Carroll.
Just a quick question. With respect to consumer protections, I note that in the report and certainly in your presentation at committee, what role we're taking in consumer protection has really only to do with things associated with the fees. Are we in the regulatory regime not allowed to have other consumer protections?
Through you, Madam Speaker, thank you for the question, Councillor Carroll. I know that the conversation typically seems to revolve around the rates, but that's actually a smaller component of the entire regulatory regime we have. A number of the recommendations you have in front of you are exactly for those things. We've aligned some of our recommendations with the amendments that the province has made to the Consumer Protection Act and the Repairs and Lien Storage Act as well. One notable change that we're adding into our bylaw reflects that consumer protection issue is the consent to tow, that a written authorization for towing must be obtained from the consumer or the customer, and the tow truck operator must provide it. So there are actually a number of consumer protection items that we are embedding.
So is there an appeal mechanism? And I'm not talking about all tow truck drivers. I'm going to make that very clear. I'm not talking about all. But in those situations where it's really not until the whole thing is over that you begin to realize, I ended up not at the center my insurance company recommended. I took a tow truck driver's word for it. And now I have a strong suspicion that the garage I ended up at and the tow truck driver are in fact in some sort of collusion, and I don't think I actually was properly served. Where's the appeal mechanism? Does that go beyond what we can do municipally?
So through you, Madam Speaker, certainly, Councillor Carroll, it would depend on the circumstances. We do have a number of provisions in our bylaw that do give us enforcement powers around the consent to tow, which we are embedding, as well as other mechanisms. So depending on the situation, what happens, it may be municipally enforceable by us. If it's an issue of fraud, then that would be a referral to the Toronto Police Service.
Oh, okay, it wouldn't be an ombudsman issue, for instance. Then the next step is police service.
Yeah, if a member, sorry, through you, Madam Speaker, if a member of the public has an issue with a tow truck operation, we are one of those lines of defense with the regulations to the extent that we are involved in regulating those the provisions that we have to enforce. If there's activity that is tipping into potentially criminal conduct, then the Toronto Police Service would do that. I can share that the province did undertake a large anti-fraud task force initiative, and out of that came many of these amendments to consumer protection legislation as well. So there's a variety of sources that people can use.
Right, and in your work in preparing this update to our role in the regulatory framework, in preparing this update, did you have a chance? You had a chance to scan, so that we know that is not the norm. That is an occasional, but not the norm in terms of services going on in the city now.
So through you, Madam Speaker, I'm not quite clear scanning which, Councillor Carroll.
Well, I'm wondering if in scanning the industry to develop the updated framework here with respect to fees and tightening up on some of the rules, was there any sort of investigation to ensure that by and large what we are regulating are really by and large good practices and we're just updating them here? Was there any look to make sure that we don't have a rampant problem of tow truck garage collusion and vaguely criminal activity? It's not the norm.
Great. So through you, Madam Speaker, yes, we do a jurisdictional scan. All the municipalities around us, about 14 municipalities in and around around Toronto do license. We've looked at what they do. I would say that with these amendments, we're actually going to be the leader as far as the consumer protection provisions within our municipal bylaw, as we've taken direct assurance that we are embedding the consumer protection related changes as we can, similarly to what was done provincially. We do look at our enforcement history. One of our biggest enforcement challenges is overcharging, enforcement complaints is overcharging. But we did do quite extensive consultation, and I think we've got a nice balance of recommendations here to shore up some consumer protection opportunities, at the same time being fair to the tow truck industry itself.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor DeGiorgio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Ms. Cook, I just have one very quick question, just to refresh my memory. At committee, it was my understanding that we asked you to review the $100 flat fee charge for recovery services at accidents on city streets or on highways. Did you give it a second thought or no?
Through you, Madam Speaker, absolutely, sir, we did, given the direction from committee, and I believe that was yours specifically. We did recognize it's a challenge in how to quantify what the amount, how you would calculate that amount on the road. If you do it by time, if you do it by type of equipment, a lot of thought went into it in the first instance. So we landed at the $100 is generally around where other municipalities are. But I think that's something that as we continue forward with the industry, that we continue to monitor and determine if there are additional provisions or considerations that need to be put in place. But it's a very difficult piece of the work to hive off and create a calculation for it that consumers would understand. So we did look at it, but we're not recommending a change at this point.
At this time?
At this point.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Speaker. Through you to Ms. Cook. Effectively, and underscoring what you're proposing, because it's, as I understand it, I've not had a lot of experience with the tow truck industry, which is great. I'm happy about that.
Touch wood.
Touch wood, yes, yes. There's a distance issue now, so if you go far distance, you're paying a distance charge. Is that what we see currently? And are you now moving to change that? You having a flat fee that would eliminate some of the challenges that the public have had with respect to going to far-reaching ends of the city and being charged a kilometer charge in terms of how the industry works? You're attempting to address that?
So through you, Madam Speaker, thank you, Councillor Thompson. It gives me the chance to clarify. The rate that we are regulating is only rates related to accident tows and private property. If your battery dies, your car breaks down other than an accident, that is not a regulated rate by the city. That is an industry rate. So the rates we have here currently, and for the last number of years, at least 11 years, the tow truck industry has had a $166 and $188 accident tow rate for city road highway. What we're proposing is $250, irrespective of which type of roadway they're on. And that's to cover from the accident scene to the collision reporting center. In those instances where the collision reporting center is not closed or the police investigate on scene and the vehicle needs to be taken beyond or would like to be taken beyond the city boundary, it's the $250 and then plus that kilometer. Yep.
Madam Speaker.
Yeah, it's pretty noisy.
The noise level is extremely high.
If the noise is coming from up there.
Well, it's coming from everywhere, apparently, although I can't
No.
really hear Ms. Cook.
I usually don't have that.
Can I ask the public, the staff, everyone that's up there that's talking, please, you're way too loud. Everybody that's up there, including the media. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Cook?
So just for clarity, so the two rates we regulate, private property and accident tow. The most applicable to your question is the accident tow. It's $250 to the CRC, flat rate, not dissimilar to what we've been charging as different flat rates for the last number of years, or allowed them to charge for the last number of years. There is, in addition, a per kilometer rate should the tow truck operator be directed outside of the City of Toronto, and we're proposing that at $3.25 per kilometer, starts at the boundary until the customer's final destination. So those are the only rates that we're regulating. A regular breakdown of a vehicle is not a regulated rate by the city.
So can I just ask you maybe to expand, and you said, I think your words were, should the tow truck operator be directed? So there is a direction, I presume that would come from the customer, but what happens in this particular case where a tow truck operator, and it's been told to me, I've not had the experience, says, well, I think the best place to take your car to a place which is quite some distance and maybe it's a little bit out of the city, how is that then treated? I mean, does a customer have to rely or accept that direction, because it would be a direction from the operator of the tow truck itself, not so much that the customer is directing that, can you take my car to, I don't know, Kleinberg for all that, as an example?
Through you, Madam Speaker, that was at the crux of some of the Consumer Protection Act changes that the province made and that we have mirrored in our bylaw to ensure that there is a written authorization from the owner of the vehicle with the tow truck operator that the vehicle is to be taken to the destination of the customer's choosing. There's also a requirement if the tow truck operator has a relationship with a garage or whatnot, that must be disclosed.
All right, so my final question to you, I don't know if there's you talked about consumer protection and so on, but is there a Bill of Rights, for example, for, customers with utilizing the services of tow truck operators as such? Is there?
So through you, Madam Speaker, very similarly to what we've done with the taxi industry, we are talking about a tow Bill of Rights. And so people know what their rights are, as well as the requirement for that information to be made available. And we're going to work on format.
Communicating that once that's done.
Must
Thank
be.
you.
Must be.
Thank you. Thank you, Speaker.
It's you tell people to keep it down, and then everybody starts talking again. I just, at this rate, we'll have to stop every 2 minutes because it doesn't make any difference. Okay. Speakers, Councillor DeChani, you held the item down. Did you want to speak?
No, I'm okay, Madam Speaker.
Okay. Councillor Palacio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I would like to move first the staff's recommendations on the main report. Also, I'd like to move the additional recommendations and that are before us, noted as LS 21.1A, as well as I would like to move is 2 recommendations. And the first one, they're on the screen. The first one is that to delete recommendation number 21 and to replace with that City Council direct that tow truck owners or drivers must ensure that the tow truck is appropriately sized for the type of vehicle being towed. And number 2, City Council direct the Executive Director of Municipal Licensing Standards to review towing rates in 1 year time and report back to the Licensing Standards Committee with recommendations. Madam Chair and members of Council, first and foremost, I want to thank City staff for the amazing work that they have done on this file and for their well thought out recommendations that you have put together. Also, I want to thank members of the committee for asking tough questions and for coming up with meaningful recommendations, as well as I want to thank the industry for their input. I think that moving forward, and we have a good framework in terms of serving not only the industry but the public. We did have a lengthy debate at the Licensing Standards Committee, and there were a number of recommendations and submissions. And at that point, in the wisdom of the committee, it was decided that city staff should look at those recommendations, should look at those submissions, and report back to City Council directly if there is merit on those recommendations, which they did. And that's the recommendations that we have in this supplementary. So to avoid a lengthy debate today on this subject, there was a lot of work yesterday, and including this morning, with interested members of council, with city staff, including the mayor's office, to try to put a package together that's going to serve the industry in terms of financial viability moving forward, as well as to the public in terms of consumer protection. Those are the key factors in terms of creating a fair balance all throughout. So the recommendations that I'm putting forward at this point are within the framework of what's been done, not only within the committee, within city staff, but building up on what the province and the review of the trucking industry, they decided that the minimum truck weight shouldn't be more than 6,000 pounds. And that's for smaller trucks. And I understand there are about 250 trucks out on the road. And that was one of the key objections from the industry, is either if the new regulations are going to be implemented, most of them, they are going to be put out in the street. They are going to be unemployed. They are going to lose those 250 trucks. And that's totally, it was, in my opinion, totally wrong. So we had to take a second look at it and to see what needed to be done. So especially when we have congested spaces like laneways, we have apartment buildings in the downtown and all over the city where we need these small trucks. And I think the first recommendation that I'm putting forward deals with that, because that gives back the power back to the industry. They know better than anyone else what tools that they need to be functional in the road. So that's the first recommendation. The second recommendation in terms of rates, I think that's only fair to review the rates as we move forward, and that's what my recommendation does. It's asking the Executive Director of Municipal Licensing Standards to look at other jurisdictions as well within the GTA, to consult with the industry, and to come back in a year's time with additional recommendations, which makes a lot of sense in terms of fairness. Fairness to the industry, to make them financially viable, as well as to the public, to make sure that we have consumer protection. And that's the whole thing. So in essence, we have something that will serve everyone. And on that, I really want to thank city staff, members of council, and the public for their input. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councilor Karygiannis, did you want to speak to this?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I do. And maybe later on you'll allow me to introduce my kids. Madam Speaker, I want to thank you for the opportunity. I want to thank the staff for the work they did, and I also want to thank the industry. The industry throughout the years has tried to self-regulate. They're small owners, operators. They've had their challenges. There's been some bad apples along the way, and a lot of the time when you're driving through, you will see them standing on the side of the highway or on the side of any street waiting to hear the call. But they're the first people that show up, even sometimes before police or ambulance, and they're there to help, and they're always helpful, and they always help the people that are in an accident. But there's also some of them that have taken advantage. In my part of the world, where I'm close up to Markham, we also have some of the people from Markham that scoot down south of Steeles. And I was assured by the Executive Director of Licensing and Standards that they will take a proactive and aggressive action to make sure that the people that in my part of the world and people south of Steeles only get helped and looked after by licensed tow truck operators that are from Toronto. I want to thank the staff for their report, and certainly I was very pleased to hear today that there will be an opportunity for the smaller trucks to be able to work underground in apartment buildings, and for that I will be supporting the recommendations and looking forward to see how they work and how we process forward. Madam Speaker, can I take 30 seconds to introduce my kids?
Hey, go ahead. Go ahead. Go. Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to welcome St. Sylvester School under the leadership of Principal Roy Fernandez. That's done a couple of stints in that school. I want to thank the teacher, Bob Stoner, and Brian Melly, and also we have a parent with them, Mireya Mandaka. And what they're doing is a very interesting program which is called Beyond the Classroom. This is their second year that they're doing it, and they're going to Queen's Park, and they're coming down here to see how government operates. So St. Sylvester, shout out to you, and welcome to City Hall.
Thank you. So on the amendment by Councillor Palacio, recorded vote. Amendment 1A, recorded vote.
Councillor Pasternak, when you're seated, please.
The motion carries unanimously, 39 in favor.
Amendment 1B, recorded vote.
Councillor DeGiorgio, please. Councillor McMahon.
Councillor Holland. Councillor DiCiano, please.
Councillor Pasternak, please.
The motion carries 37 to 1.
On the item as amended, all in favor? Carried. Before we go to the next item, Councillor Al-Jamari, you wanted to declare an interest.
Thank you. Page 5, TE 26.25, 85, 87, 89, and 91 Broadway, and 198 Redpath Avenue zoning amendment, because I own property in the immediate area.
Okay, thank you. Our next timed item is Executive Committee 2731, which is on page 3, further direction to the city manager on the study of the commuter parking crisis in Toronto. Councillor Pasternak, you held the item down. Do we have questions to staff on this item? Yes, there are questions. Councillor Pasternak, do you have questions?
I do.
Okay, so go ahead.
Madam Speaker.
Okay.
When commuter parking in our transit system, I don't know, who would this go to? The city manager is fine. When we put in commuter parking 2 generations ago in the inner suburbs, would it be safe to say that this was because of geographical distance, accommodating seniors and the disabled, young families, the ability to drop your kids off at school, your spouse at work, and then park and then take the subway downtown? Would those be some of the core reasons for having commuter parking?
I believe so, but I think the question would probably be best answered by city planning.
Through the speaker. Certainly, the reasons that you have given, Councillor, would explain why parking was put in, but some of the policies and directions that we have in the growth plan and official plan have changed since then.
So the number of seniors has gone up, the number of disabled have gone up, the number of young families have gone up, geographical distances between home and subway stations are basically the same. This has all remained static or more acute, yet what would be the logic in removing commuter parking lot if the original rationale for having them exist or are more acute?
Through the speaker, at the same time that we've had those demographic changes, we've also made increases in TTC service that provide connections for users of the system. An important part of subway ridership levels is strong connections with buses and accessible transportation.
Now, many of the suburbs are built on a grid pattern. I bring Bathurst Manor to your attention, where the walk to even a bus stop may be 15, 20 minutes, and then maybe another 10 minutes to wait for a bus. And then now, more than a generation ago, parents are taking their kids to school. Do you think it's realistic that someone would have to walk 15, 20 minutes to a bus stop, wait 10 minutes for a bus, take a bus to the local public school, and then somehow get to the subway station? Is the goal to have them leave their car at home?
Through the speaker, one of our key goals right now, and this is reflected in the growth plan as well as in city official plan policies is to increase development related to transit around transit stations to make things more accessible, transit more accessible for more people. Certainly there are some challenges in terms of the development pattern in some of the outer parts of the city, but again, through changes to TTC service as well, we are working on ways to improve access for people. And in all of the stations, there are also opportunities for people to be dropped off.
Would you say that the needs of the commuter in the inner suburbs would be the same as the needs of the commuter, let's say below or in the downtown core?
Through the speaker, I think it is, you are probably right in stating that conditions are different in the outer parts of the city as compared to the downtown core. That's why part of what we're trying to do through the growth plan and the official plan is to start to transform the development that we see around the existing and indeed the new transit lines that we're building.
So many of these decisions, would you agree, were made in 2009 before many of the people in this chamber were actually here? They were made in two councils ago, 2009. Is that, when I look at the history of this decision-making, it seems to connect back to that time.
Through the speaker, I have no way to comment on which of your fellow councillors were here at the time, but it was a decision made in 2009.
Right. So many have argued today, or as this debate intensifies, that the decision's been made. It was made in 2009. Let's stick with the decision. There's no point in revisiting.
Last question.
Now, based on the logic of a decision made back in the 60s and 70s, does it make sense to not revisit a decision now because the decision was made in 2009, but in 2009 it was okay to revisit a decision made in the 70s?
Through the speaker, the decision made in 2009, as I understand it, was connected to the decision about the extension of the subway and was also based on the desire to change the nature of development around the subway system. As we are investing in our system, we're trying to change how development happens around and have a much different pattern of development that supports rapid transit in the area.
That was your last question. Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Councillor Perks.
Thank you, Speaker. So the item we have in front of us is a recommendation to the TTC Board to have public information on the closure of the Wilson Station subway parking lot. That work is already underway?
Correct.
And when is that work due to be completed?
Before the end of the year.
Before the end of the year. So I'm not sure who this question would go to, maybe the city manager, I suppose. If we directed that a consultation take place on this station, or rather, we would have to organize it, then we'd have to have a report come back to committee. When do you think that report could get back to a committee?
I assume that it would delay the work. I'm obviously not in a position to comment the exact timing.
No, I'm just trying to understand, like in our normal process, if we go out for a public consultation and then we have a report come to committee and then council, that doesn't happen overnight. That takes a couple of months?
It does, yes.
It does. So here we are. I'm forgetting the date today. It's October 4th. A couple of months from now is October, November, December 4th. How many days of construction would be left? How many days of closure would be left by the time we got the advice on the consultation?
A matter of weeks.
A matter of weeks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Councillor DiCiano, I have to go past myself on the list, so I'm wondering if you are ready to ask your questions?
Yes, I am, Madam Speaker, Deputy Speaker. In Etobicoke Lakeshore, the Kipling subway station is the end of the line. And for many, many years, commuters from the west, the Mississauga, Brampton, Vaughan, they were coming into Etobicoke, parking their cars, and getting on the subway. Now we continue to sell all these assets, and I'm told that there's a plan, but I don't see the plan. Can someone tell me what the plan is exactly to encourage people to take their vehicles to the beginning of the line in Etobicoke? Because without commuter parking, these people have no choice but then just to remain on the road and come down into an even more congested city.
So through the Speaker, part of what we're doing in our work with Metrolinx is about expanding the network of connections and transit across the region that make it a better choice for commuters to get onto transit closer to home.
Yeah, but that's fine and dandy. We know that that may take 10, 15, 20 years. So what do we do in that short period of time of 20 years that people need to access transit?
1 second, I'm going to stop your time. Councillor DiCiano, I think I have a point of order?
Yes, Speaker, on a point of order.
Sorry.
On a point of order, while I appreciate that Councillor DiCiano has legitimate concerns, the item in front of us concerns the Wilson Park subway station and is not a general conversation. We don't have a report or a letter on a general conversation about parking in the suburbs.
Thank you.
Parking at commuter stations. I want to know what the plan is.
Councillor DiCiano, I'm going to caution, I'm not going to rule, I'm going to caution you. When you say what do we do, you're referring to how do people get to a commuter parking that is not in fact slated for closure. If you could confine your remarks to what would people do in the area of the parking lot that is in fact slated for closure, we will stay in order.
Sure. Do we have a plan if we close any other commuter parking lots in Toronto?
If we could stick to what is the plan for Wilson, then you're totally in order.
Okay. So with respect to Wilson,
sorry, Councillor DiCiano, I'm going to have to stop your time again. I have another point of order. Councillor Holyday.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very clearly see the words "other points of entry" in recommendation number 1. And in my conversation with Councillor Pasternak back in July, that was added to very specifically encompass all subway stations on the line and the commonality of parking issues that would include, for instance, the Kipling or the Islington subway station in the West End. So I am of the firm belief that this report speaks to greater issues than simply just Wilson, and I do believe that the councillor's questions are in order.
To be clear, the member motion speaks to other points of entry, the report does not.
Okay.
Thank you. So if we could talk about what staff have actually proposed, we can all stay in order.
my question then is going to be, if Wilson is to be closed, or any other commuter parking lot is to be closed, is there a plan to accommodate the people that are accessing public transit by way of their vehicle? Is there a plan other than to say we're working on other transit options within the region? Because I'll be dead when those are done. So what's the plan?
So we're talking about Wilson Station specifically. The plan was and still is the additional parking that was provided as part of the Line 1 subway extension up into Vaughan.
When is that going to happen?
So as of December 17th, when that extension opens and the parking lots open, that additional parking capacity will be made available.
And is it one-for-one replacement?
Yes. If you exclude Yorkdale from that, yes.
But this
in fact, whilst Yorkdale is still open, there'll be a surplus of additional 500 spots
in Vaughan,
along the Spadina subway extension, at more than 4 stations.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the one commuter parking lot that is part of this motion in this report. So you're replacing it along the line. You're not replacing it where people actually find it convenient to travel to, or their closest point.
But the The work that we have done suggests that the majority of customers who are using the parking lots along that end of the subway line are actually coming from the west or the north outside of Toronto.
Okay, and that strategy, why is that strategy not utilized in Etobicoke? Why are we just closing down? Why are we just, no, it's a good strategy. So I don't know why we're not doing that, why we're just closing them down in other parts of the city where the line ends. If you're able to justify it that way, what's the justification on the other side of the city for closing them without any future subway stations?
We're not closing the parking lots at Kipling Station.
Well, we've sold off many of them in the area at Islington, and we're wondering, there's hundreds and hundreds of commuters extending through several councillors' wards here, including Mississauga residents, are wondering how they access the subway. Is there a plan for that?
Did you tell he's coming in at 2 o'clock?
There isn't. That's all I want to know. You can go ahead and say it. There's no plan. We actually don't care.
Was that question meant to be rhetorical, Councillor DiCiano? You're not
Well,
requiring an answer?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be answered.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on then. Councillor Campbell?
Madam Speaker, I'd like some clarification about the topic that we're discussing, because you've defined it as only concerning the permanent closure of the Wilson commuter parking lot. But the title of EX 27.31 is further direction to the city manager on the study of commuter parking crisis in Toronto, which would lead me to believe that it goes beyond.
Hold on, Councillor Burks, let him make his point.
Which leads me to believe that it goes beyond the concern of just one station.
Well, I thank you for raising this point of order, because while I did caution Councillor DiCiano, he continued to go beyond in any case. Since that time, I thank you for raising this, because the clerk has shared with me the original motion and the follow-on of this item. I hadn't gone back that far in my review of the agenda. So I will allow a little bit of talking about the and other points, okay. But I will remind you that it is in fact Wednesday.
I'm aware of that. I'm aware of that. You know, it is Wednesday. But
so if you want to proceed with your questions, let's start the clock back up again.
That's fine. Thank you. Okay. So let me ask. Actually, I'll ask the first question is in regard to the Wilson Station. So I'll stay on topic for a moment. And so it says in the summary that it's the permanent closure of the station. So all of the parking at the Wilson Station, I gather, is gone, and they're looking to absorb the overflow at Yorkdale. Is that correct?
Not all of the parking at Wilson Station is gone to date. No, one of the lots is closed, another lot is partially closed, and another lot has partially used for a temporary bus loop whilst we reconstruct the bus loop at the station.
And why was some of it closed? Can you give me some reasons why some of this parking space have been lost?
So the majority of the Wilson parking lots have been allocated for development, and they either have been sold off or
so that was sorry, was that Build Toronto that sold off that land? What?
Correct.
And when Build Toronto sold off that land, was there any direction from this council to preserve those spaces that were heretofore on the site?
I don't believe so.
No. So Build Toronto was given no direction when selling the property to preserve commuter, as we sometimes do with rental housing. They didn't care about commuter parking. Okay. How many could you tell this, Mr. Bordewick, could you tell this council how many commuter spots have been lost in the last 3 or 4 years? Or where they've been lost? Because I know they've been lost at Islington and now at Wilson.
Oh, yeah. That's not the...
And I believe some are going to be lost at York Mills and Yonge.
I believe about 2,000 spots have been lost to date.
2,000 spots have been lost to date. All right. Okay. That's and the TTC and the city. The TTC and the city have no plan to accommodate those commuters. Is that correct?
I'm going to jump in if I could, Madam Speaker. I think the one thing that's been missing in this debate is the discussion about our official plan. Our official plan sets out policies that dictate the way that redevelop this city, and included in that is the questions of mobility and the objects of increasing mobility for a wide variety of people. It doesn't specifically zero in on commuter versus commuter parking lots. It doesn't get that granular, but I don't think it's any secret to this council that we're encouraging the redevelopment of the city. We're encouraging redevelopment around subway stations. We are increasing our efforts to increase the transit modal split and have more people using transit, more people able to access the network that we're building. And yes, that probably means that the shift of commuter parking goes from some of the city lots to lots like the ones that we see up in the 407 transit station along the Young Spadina subway extension. So when you look at the official plan, the guiding document, all the public works, the TTC, transportation, planning, all have to abide by those documents, and that's giving you some general direction that you're seeing.
So while I appreciate that answer, Mr. Libby, it doesn't, that policy or what we're undertaking doesn't address the needs of...
Is that a question?
I'm asking a question. I'm getting a question.
Sounds like a rebuttal.
Sorry. I'll get to a question. That policy does not seem to address the needs of commuters who are coming into Toronto and using the TTC. And why is the city not recognizing that? Because those commuters are TTC riders, and the TTC needs ridership rather than people riding on the roads.
So, Madam Speaker, we're making extraordinary efforts with Metrolinx to provide mobility across the line. We're looking at commuter parking options and transit options like the Viva system in York Region to load into our system. We're looking at a variety of things in conjunction with Metrolinx to increase the mobility and increase transit usage. We're not looking to provide and solve problems of commuter parking per se as the principal object. It's a balance between all the things that we're doing, including intensification and including the work that we do with Metrolinx.
All right, that's all my questions, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Karagiannis is next.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to staff, really appreciate you being here this morning and giving us an insight on how this your methodology is working. I was wondering if you can please elaborate how you came about the closing of the subway stations, or you're recommending the closing of the parking lots at the subway stations. Did you do a count of the cars? Did you consult the community around the areas? I'm going to put my time on hold until they find out who's answering.
Until we find out who's answering. Here you go. Here's your answer, Councillor Karagiannis.
So if the question was, did we consult people with regards to the redevelopment of the
Did you
community
consult
parking
the people in the neighborhood about closing the parking lot, in the immediate neighborhood?
I'm not aware whether any consultation took place.
Okay. Would you be surprised if I was to tell you that there were no consultations that were held? I mean, I've heard from the local councillor and I heard from stakeholders in the area there was very little consultation.
I'm afraid I can't comment on what happened in 2009.
Now, how do you go about determining if the existing parking lots in a subway station or future developments like a Metrolinx or like a GO station, how do you go about determining how many parking spots are needed?
Through the Speaker, we look at a number of things that determine ridership on transit lines, and what we find is that the key driver for transit ridership is about strong connections to bus routes and other transit services, as well as people walking in. There is some portion of ridership that comes from people in commuter parking lots, but that's a small portion of the overall ridership, and we're trying to drive more people to take transit.
Would you agree with me that most people north of the 401 in certain parts of our city, like Etobicoke, North York, and especially in Scarborough where I live, use cars to get around?
Through the Speaker, many people across the city and in Scarborough, yes, use cars to get around.
So in my area, in the subdivisions we're faced in, and to get to the TTC stop, it might be anywhere between 500 meters to 2 kilometers. A person would more likely be able to get in the car, as in Councillor Pasternak's area, in order to get to the subway stop, versus walking the 2 kilometers to get on the bus, especially in the wintertime or situations where it's dark at night and you do not want to have your parts of your family. I would certainly not want to have my daughters be walking at that point in time. Would you agree with me?
Through the Speaker, part of what we're trying to do is to change the way in which development happens and the pattern of development around our new transit investments. Yes, there are some parts of Scarborough and other parts of the city where, because of the nature of the development, you may have longer paths. I can't comment on whether it's 200.
People through the Speaker that live there, we also have to accommodate them. Like in my area, my 60,000 constituents that need to go to a TTC stop.
Is this a question?
It is a question, Chair. Just give me 30 seconds. As in Councillor Pasternak's, they will be more prone to use their car. I mean, if you lived up there, wouldn't you do the same?
Through the Speaker, if you're asking me about my preferences, I'd bike or take transit to work. If you're asking me about what people will do and how we get more people on transit, my response will be the same, that we are trying to encourage more people to get there by walking, cycling, and other means of transit, because that's what really starts to drive transit. And that development around, changing the nature of development around the stations is such an important thing.
Through the Speaker to staff, so what you're telling me is that I should encourage my family, my daughters, to get on a bike at 10 o'clock at night, or walk to the bus station, which is 2 kilometers away in the snow, trudging through the snow, or for that matter of fact, these kids that are up here visiting from my school, you'd want me to encourage them to walk 2 kilometers to a bus stop.
Through the Speaker, I cannot comment on the distance to bus stops in Scarborough, but I would suggest that it's probably not 2 kilometers.
Would you like to take measurements and put that into a situation, maybe a small wager, friendly wager?
Through the Speaker, I won't wager with you, Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Holliday, questions?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I guess through you to the planning department, would you say that closing a commuter lot increases or decreases transit ridership?
Through the Speaker, we need to look at this in terms of what is happening around those or on those former parking lots, where we're talking about some major developments that will increase transit ridership. It may displace or change the patterns of some individuals, but overall, that development around those stations along the TYSSE should increase transit ridership.
Right. So is development and the existence of a commuter parking lot mutually exclusive? In other words, can you develop over a parking lot space and still have that parking lot?
Through the Speaker, certainly there may be situations where developers want to include parking and make that not just for building residents or office occupants, but available to commuters and others.
So back to the other question, if we could replace a parking lot within a development and increase the density around the station, which I think is what the official plan talks about, does that parking lot increase or decrease transit ridership? If you have 1,000 spaces and it's filled, that's 1,000 transit riders that may not otherwise take transit. Would that be correct?
Through the Speaker, if those people are parking there in order to take transit, then yes, that is adding to transit ridership.
So then why are we encouraging or supporting the closure of parking lots, and why are we not encouraging the development of transit parking in conjunction with densification that's going on around our transit stations?
Through the Speaker, that sort of joint development is something that we would be quite open to in the context of the work we're doing on Smart Track and other major transit projects. I'm not able to comment on what Build has included in their deals. I think the Deputy City Manager wants to add.
If I could, I want to go back to the work that we're doing with Metrolinx and with the adjacent municipalities. To the extent that Peel and York develop a more robust and accessible transit system like Viva or Brampton Zum or Mississauga Transit, and as they can intercept commuter parking, commuter trips, and have them dropped off onto their transit system to load onto our system, that and in conjunction with GO, with the recent announcement or coming announcement on fare reductions or co-fare, we are successful. What it does is it takes those trips that are coming into the city, takes them off our streets and gets them onto our transit earlier. And that's really what the pattern of development has shifted. So the commuter parking lots are now moving to the periphery, but we're mostly interested in seeing the success of Viva and Zum and Mississauga Transit to intercept those people closer to home.
Understood. Are those enhancements here today? Or are we still waiting for those, and are some of them somewhat aspirational?
Madam Speaker, we're picking up on a report came as a member's motion with a whole series of recommendations around Wilson and the Downsview and other stations, and we were having that conversation around Wilson, and now it's expanded into a larger conversation, which I'm happy to have today, but I did think we were going to talk about Wilson Station.
So just to follow on that, I very much appreciate the argument. The notion that the north-south line is extending, and there is some replacement commuter parking that is being pushed out of the 416 and into the 905. However, and the policies are built around that. However, is that same extension happening on all 3 points of the compass? Are we seeing that same extension, let's say, in the Etobicoke area, where we're losing commuter parking and there isn't necessarily the replacement of that parking going on in the Peel region?
So through the Speaker, Councillor, we are working on the motion that you passed or had passed in 2016 with regard to commuter parking linked to the Eglinton West LRT station, and looking at opportunities in conjunction with that project with City of Mississauga and the airport. In terms of other things that Peel, I can't answer here right now about other things that Peel or York are doing and how they're dealing with parking along their lines.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Councillor Holliday. I would like to acknowledge former MP John Nunziata in the council chambers. And as well, I have a cousin, Angela and Pietro, that just arrived from Milan, just arrived this morning. Welcome. They came directly to council, just arrived. Yeah. Councillor Cole.
Good, though, anyway. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and welcome, Nunziatas. Just, and I'm sure this has been asked and answered, but just to clarify, when was the decision made to close this lot?
In 2009. 2009?
What year is it now? So I understand that they're obviously surprised when it eventually closes, but it's been since 2009. Do we have a sense of, while we know that some of the people who use the Wilson lot are local, are not many of them traveling from further north in the city and even up as far as Vaughan?
Based on a survey that we did we did the majority of customers are coming from the west and north of Toronto, outside of Toronto.
So they're coming from outside of Toronto to park in this local lot. When this was shut down, Yorkdale in my ward was reopened. Those parking spots were reopened. How many spots were then added to the capacity at Yorkdale for commuter parking?
Just over 1,000. So
1,000 at Yorkdale. How many with the new stations opening in a matter of months now, weeks almost? How many spots will be added at the Highway 407 station where many of these commuters are coming from?
Almost 600.
So 600 there. How about Pioneer Village Station, right at the north end of York University?
Close to 1,900.
Okay, so almost, I'll call that 2,000. Finch West, right in the city of Toronto, how many spots are being added?
365.
And the Vaughan Metropolitan Centre, where again many of these commuters are coming from?
At least 500, but still to be confirmed.
So,
it will be higher.
So 1,000 at Yorkdale, almost 2,000 at Steeles, 600 at 407, almost 400 at Finch, and 500 at the end of the line. We are adding more parking to around subway stations probably than we ever have in history and probably ever will again, but we are adding thousands and thousands of spots. 4,500, Professor Burnside just told me.
Correct.
Professore.
I can add, I can't. Not divide.
On a separate note, my count is that roughly over this term of council, the TTC has or will have ordered about 800 new buses. Is that about accurate?
Yes.
Do we have, is our hope that with those 800 buses we're putting on the street on top of our existing fleet of thousands of buses, that people would maybe opt, plus the service we've added, that people would opt to take transit to get to a subway station?
That would be our hope, along with our general strategy to improve integration in and around subway stations with pick-up and drop-off points, integration with bike share and cycle parking, that we are working closely with the city to ensure that we have that integration across the city, as well as the collaboration that we do with Metrolinx with regards to how our service and the surrounding municipalities' services integrate.
So the decision to close this lot happened 2 terms of council ago. We're in the process of adding 4,500 new spots to the area. We've added service and buses that are connecting to all these transit stations, including Wilson. Is that correct?
Correct.
One other question, and I don't know, maybe the city manager would have to answer this. We have a new real estate board or entity that's being put in place. There's a question of whose responsibility this is and whether the TTC has, forget about whether they have the money or can find the land to build parking capacity, but is it even under our jurisdiction with the new entity in place to embark on projects like that?
I believe it will be.
That the TTC can still buy new lots?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Ainsley, questions?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So this item was considered at Executive Committee along with number 11, which was the Toronto Spadina parking options. And in the attachment that comes with it, and follow up on what Councillor Cole was saying, you can see all the new parking at the north end where the subway line was extended. So it's almost like it was decided we're going to put in another 4,500 spots and close the lots further down and follow the direction that council gave to maximize the value of that property, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so we're putting in 4,500 new spots. I think there's another additional 1,000 that Councillor Cole mentioned at York Centre, correct? Or Yorkdale?
I believe the 4,500 includes Yorkdale.
And how many spots are we closing?
Through you, Speaker, it's a net gain of 522 spaces overall until 2026, and then it is a loss of 488 spaces, 2026 and following.
Okay. And that also doesn't include, as Councillor Cole said, all the number of new buses that are going to be traveling along that and a brand new subway system.
Correct.
And the other thing that I wanted to ask was, when it comes to public transit, often I hear, so demographic speaking, as the population ages, and that all-important group of 18 to 24-year-olds, I don't often see them saying, I want to drive to the subway station. They're asking about public transit, or there's a whole raft of reasons they don't want to drive, so they would prefer going to a subway station or a GO train station than driving because they don't have a car, correct?
Through you, Madam Speaker, that's correct. We've seen a trend, not just in Toronto, but North America-wide, of 16 to 44-year-olds actually getting their driver's license, either delaying it or not getting them at all. And in fact, just as recently as well, in 2014 is the last number that I could find, only 24.5% of 16-year-olds had a license, which is a steep decline from years previous. So that trend is certainly changing.
And sorry, that age group again was 16?
16 to 44, but
16 to 44.
16 to 44 is where we're seeing the decline. Actually, since about 1983, we've started to see a decline. The 24.5% is of 16-year-olds, so people formerly eager to get their driver's license.
Yeah, and so just to be clear, so that's a North America trend. 16-year-olds in Toronto aren't all suddenly running out of class in high school to get to the Service Ontario kiosk to book their driving test. They're public transit advocates.
Correct.
Bike lanes.
Correct. Walking, cycling, transit, but also some of them are delaying the decision to get a license until later on.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Davis, questions?
Thank you. I actually was here when we transferred these stations to Bill Toronto to ask for them to look at the development possibilities at all of them, and I know Councillor Holland will recognize that Victoria Park Station was one of those that we were dealing with, but one of the redevelopment objectives was to replace the parking if it was possible in the redevelopment. I think I heard you say previously you are still doing that. Is that part of, and I don't know whether it's to the city manager, it's the Build Toronto question, I think.
That is correct, Madam Speaker.
That's correct. And as far as young people or anyone else who needs rides to stations, one of the other things we were challenged with in redeveloping the station was pickup and drop-off facilities. Do we still have, and are we designing stations with pickup and drop-off facilities so parents at 10 o'clock at night can go pick up their kids?
Yes, we are.
So that is, and accessibility is, I presume, going to be entrenched in every single thing we do in capital work for the TTC?
Correct. All stations are funded to be accessible by 2025.
Okay. And just, again, there is a net increase in spaces of about 500, I think I wrote down 522 spaces until 2026.
Through you, Speaker, yes, and then after 2026, there's a loss.
But the assumption is by 2026, we will have improved access to transit in these and other areas, correct?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong, questions?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I wasn't going to rise, but there's some questions that need to be, and issues need to be addressed, and some context needs to be given the previous questions. So my first question is as well, the number of people with, young people may not be applying for licenses. Is it not true that the number of families with cars is increasing in the GTA?
I would have to confirm that, Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong.
So there was a study done by Queen's University that shows that the number of families that are getting cars is actually increasing. The number of families that are getting 2 cars is increasing, and that trend is going to continue. So the proposition that less people are driving is actually not necessarily the case.
Through you, Madam Speaker, I'm not familiar with that study. The studies that I've seen in some of the national journals and more recently in the paper here, although I can't put my finger on it at this moment, have indicated that the number of teens and people in the 16 to 44-year-old demographic are prolonging the time by which they get their driver's licenses, and I think there is pretty good research related to that, not just in Toronto, but
I didn't mention 16 to 44-year-olds. I didn't mention licenses. I mentioned the number of families purchasing cars.
Through you, I would have to do more research on that to be able to answer that question fully. What I know, and we'll talk about it in the upcoming discussion on free-floating car share, is that there are certainly people who are choosing to defer the purchase of a second car or not get a car at all because of the options related to car share.
So you're not aware that demographic trends show that the two largest trends are the increase in immigrants, and all those immigrants, what they want is they want to get many of them, they want to get a home in the GTA, and they also want to have that home have a driveway that they can put their cars on.
I'm not familiar with the research that you're looking at. I'll have to look at it, and I'd be happy to get back to you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I want to go back to we were talking about pedestrian safety earlier. There's a school of thought, and I wonder if you could confirm this for me. I've read about it, but admittedly in American journals. There's a school of thought that increased pedestrian animation, the more pedestrians you can put on the street, the greater the likelihood of reducing crime, in fact. Is that a trend we can see developing over time in urban centres in Canada?
Certainly, that as you have more life in an area, more people out and about on the streets, it makes for a safer and more vibrant community.
So if I have rather than take a bus or a subway or an LRT, if I have a whole bunch of 17-year-olds leaving Fairview Mall when shift is over at 9:30 at night, if 30 of them are leaving and 29 have car rides, their parents come and get them and drive them home, the one kid who walks home is less safe than if all 30 of them were walking home.
Through the Speaker, there is safety in numbers.
Yes, yes. So, so when these, and you're too young to remember, and I'm almost too young to remember, but when we first began to extend subway stations, when we were extending out lines 1 and line 2, and developing the Shepherd line, I dare say, the commuter parking lots, as I recall, they were meant not for the surrounding neighborhood. They were meant for the commuters coming from the exurbs. Is that not the case? What I recall is our parents being mad that there's going to be a big ugly parking lot in their neighborhood for the commuters coming from Markham.
Through the Speaker, it would be much better from a number of angles, public health and a number of angles, for people that are close enough to walk. And yes, I think you're correct in terms of why the lots were built in the first place.
And I'm wondering, my last question then is, I'm wondering if in 2009 the decision around Wilson might be similar to what's happened around the Don Mills subway station. It's not a TTC lot. It was an arrangement between Cadillac Fairview and TTC that there is a lot that shoppers can use, but also commuters can use. But when it was first struck, there was just the TTC and the Shepherd subway. There are now 7 YRT routes coming directly to that subway station, and so without much hue and cry, Cadillac Fairview said...
Councillor Carroll, hold on, I'm going to put your time on hold.
Thank you.
If I can ask members of council to please try to keep it down. Councillor Fletcher, Pasternak. Thank you.
So without a hue and cry, the presence of all those YRT bus routes, that's York Regional Transit coming to the station, Cadillac Fairview said, you don't need all these commuters coming here taking up my shopping spots, and they now charge for the spaces. A pretty hefty fee to discourage the commuters from loading up the parking lot. As a private sector entity, they wouldn't have had to justify the demand on the parking lot. Is the TTC required to do a study and justify, we think we can live without this lot?
I believe we're at capacity at that lot right
yes.
now.
Today with the other lot closed.
Correct.
But so the decision to then incent people to please stop filling up this lot, please use transit to get to higher orders of transit, similar to the private sector, they could simply say the options are here now. For the surrounding neighborhood to have a better quality of life, we'd rather you didn't drive your cars into the neighborhood now. Please use transit to get to higher order transit. The only issue then is the transit available? And in my local case, the answer is yes. Is the case at Wilson. There are ways to get from transit to higher order transit, and so we can make this decision.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pasternak to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The motion that Councillor Perks was referring to has been dramatically amended. I have put it on the screen. The motion was prompted by the partial closing of the Wilson subway station east parking lot, which was closed to use for several months as a temporary bus terminal. I tried to release the item over the last couple of days as amended because the construction had already started and public consultations were mute. At the same time, I've amended it so that going forward, we can consult with the public over future partial or permanent closures of our commuter parking network. So I would simply say that if we had established a commuter parking network across the city, and a lot is focused on Wilson Station, but really it's a citywide problem, to accommodate young families that live far from a bus stop or from transit, to accommodate seniors who have mobility issues, the disabled, to accommodate geographical distances that are more acute in the inner suburbs. Those matters have intensified over the years and not been reduced. We have more seniors, we have more disabled. The geographical distances have primarily made the same. Those grid patterns of various suburbs have not changed. The buses are not going down to front doors of houses in those various neighborhoods. And yet, while it was okay in 2009 to take a sober second look at our commuter parking strategy, even though conditions had not changed, for some reason some are arguing saying, well, we shouldn't take another look at it now because the decision's already made. Well, the same argument could have been used in 2009. It's important to realize that before us is a strategy to close hundreds of parking spots along Wilson Avenue and Shepherd and go on the misguided logic that people are going to drive up to the new parking spots at Highway 407, Steeles, and Finch West Station. So it's basically a parking space shell game where they're saying, sure, these spots are closing, but these spots are all opening. Now, what right-minded commuter would ever drive up to 407 from Wilson Avenue or from Shepherd to park their car just to take the subway back down? At the same time, I should point out that the new transit hub at Downsview Park Station, which includes a brand new subway station and a new GO station, has, let me just add up the numbers here. This important transit hub will have 0 parking spots available to the public. Remember, that's a new GO station and a new subway station. It is important to realize that this decision needs a major revisit, that the inner suburbs rely on the day-to-day pattern of driving their kids to school, dropping a spouse off to work, and leaving a car at the station. These are our most loyal customers. They don't want to they love their car, they drive their car, but they don't want to take their car downtown. I've received more and more emails and postings on social media that people who were once parking at Wilson Station are being shut out and not getting the spots, and they're driving downtown now. And this is exactly what we don't want. So you could have a situation in which the thousands of spots that are being lost, those people will start driving downtown, congesting our downtown streets, our downtown core. That is exactly what we don't want. We have to respect the fact that people drive, they bike, they take transit, and what we have in the inner suburbs is almost like a hybrid commuting option. They take their car out of their driveway, they take their kids, they drop them at the local school, they may drop a spouse off at work, they may do some shopping, and then they leave the car at the community parking lot. That car is there when they arrive back in the dark, late at night, in the snow, so they can get home easily, not waiting 15-20 minutes for a bus from the station, and then doing another 20-minute walk from the bus stop that they depart from or embark from to their home. This is grossly unfair. This is a misguided city policy, and all we are saying here is to take a sober second look and to take a pause. I remember during core service review, many in this chamber, many who are fighting against commuter parking lots said, once you sell a city asset, it is gone. It is gone forever. You have lost it. You can't get it back. And these are city assets. This is added revenue for our transit commission, vital revenue. They continually say how cash-starved they are. This is an important convenience for our inner suburban residents. It is respectful of the disabled who still continue to drive and seniors who have serious mobility issues. And I was at the CARP flag raising a week ago. The city is facing an age quake, and to take away commuter parking lots is really an insult to our aging population. So we need to reassess this whole venture. And unfortunately, the discussion was based
thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Your time is way over. Councillor Campbell.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Given that Councillor Pasternak in his 6 minutes encapsulated almost everything I have to say, I'll just move my motion, which speaks to the potential loss of these commuter lots and gives direction to build or any subsequent real estate entity of the City of Toronto to include in the terms of sale of that property a requirement that commuter parking spaces be preserved with any new development. So much as we do with a rental replacement when apartments are demolished, we require that they be replaced. My motion would give direction to our real estate entity that commuter parking spaces be replaced. And I guess I'll just speak to it. You know, it's all well and good to say, you know, bike to the station or take the bus to the station. But if you're out in Mississauga and you've got to get down to downtown Toronto, and your option is either to drive or take a 30-minute bus to the Kipling station and then another 45 minutes downtown, a lot of those people are going to say, forget the bus, I'm going to drive and I'll get on the Gardiner and the Lakeshore. And so if we want ridership on the TTC and we want to get people out of cars, we've got to make it easy for them to get out of cars. And what we seem to do is make it as difficult as possible for them to make that choice. So I think Council made a big mistake a long time ago. We're losing a lot of spaces at the Islington subway. We've lost them in other parts of the city. Councillor Pasternak cited some examples of what we're expecting of commuters now. Not everybody is within walking distance of a subway. Councillor Holiday uses commuter parking. I use commuter parking at the Islington station sometimes on the weekend. There's lots of people. We can't just think about Toronto and residents of Toronto who can walk to a subway or who have a short walk to a bus and a short bus ride to a subway. The TTC ridership is made up of all kinds of people from all walks of life, and they don't all have the same options of getting downtown. We have to make it as easy as possible, and I think this move would be one step in that direction. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. We do have some questions for you. Councillor Perks.
Clarification of the
3
motion.
minutes.
Yes, thank you. Would this apply to the new Scarborough Town Centre station?
We're not selling any land.
I am unaware that any land is being sold.
There is parking that will be lost there, so would you want, yes?
Is there commuter parking there? I say I'm not aware of that. But
So moving on to a more serious question. We heard in the discussion of the one subway station we were originally talking about, Wilson, that in fact we've done research that shows that 70% of the parking that's there are from people further out, and we're moving the parking further out to match that, shortening people's car trips and getting better land use around the station to reflect the needs of the community that actually lives there.
This is the switch station?
Wilson. So I'm concerned that what your motion does is freezes in time the current pattern and doesn't match the fact that we're building parking further out.
This is Councillor Perks.
Here's my question. Here's my question. Would you consider amending your motion so that it goes together with the referral to Build Toronto to allow for circumstances where we're moving the parking to better match the demand, rather than freezing the parking at the current location and forcing people to drive longer distances? That makes sense. Would you just bundle it in with Councillor Pastermak's motion?
I'm not frankly sure how I would do that, because what I'm referring to are instances where we have had land and we have sold land in and around subway stations and commuter lots have been lost. I'm not sure how many circumstances of that remain at the city, but this would essentially say to them that if you've got 100 spots, don't just sell it to Tridel and let them put in, condominium parking.
I appreciate that you can't predict what would happen in every circumstance, and that's why I would encourage you, and you said you were not sure how to do it. I could come help you find the words, but essentially attach your idea that on a net basis on a line, we don't lose parking, rather than freezing them in locations that may not be appropriate even today, let alone 10 years from now.
Well, so in regard to the motion, the other intent is to preserve commuter parking in a public lot, not necessarily in a paid private lot.
And that's an intention that I'm glad you're thinking about. I'm just wondering, though, the way it's worded, it freezes them to the specific stations they're at now.
Well, I'm happy to entertain any intelligent suggestions you might have, Councillor Perks.
I'll do my very best for you, Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Shiner, clarification of the motion.
So my first question, however, is on a point of order. And in here it says to direct. Is direct appropriate or request? Can we direct through this motion?
Who's that question to?
Oh, it's not to you yet.
No, it's not.
I do have a question.
I like the wording.
Okay, hold on, Councillor Shiner. Can somebody answer that? The solicitor? Or deputy city manager or somebody?
As the sole shareholder, council can issue a shareholder direction.
Correct. Now, this is, however, this isn't marked as a shareholder direction, and this would be contrary to the release of the land already given to Build Toronto through council. Will we not have to reopen the previous direction?
No.
So
okay, so what's your question, Councillor Shiner, to Councillor
My question
Campbell?
then of my colleague, do you understand the impact of the direction that you're asking here to preserve the parking spaces?
Is that
Financial
clarification
impact?
of the motion?
Yes.
What part of the motion do you not understand?
Well, yours says to direct,
yes,
save the spaces. In way of the Wilson lot, one of them is 600 spaces. If you're directing that they save them in the new development at a minimum of $50,000 a space, that's over $30 million, which is in excess of the value of the land. So do you understand that you're freezing the land and it can't be sold?
I do understand that.
So then the land would have to be maintained.
No, the land could be, the intent is that the land could be developed, but, and if the land is developed, it could be mixed use, residential, what have you, but they would have to preserve an equivalent number of commuter parking spaces in that.
So I'm asking you, if there's 600 spaces on one lot, because I have the list of them,
right?
And you want the 600 spaces replaced, that the value of replacing those spaces is greater than the value of the land, so in the end, you're freezing the land.
Well, I'm not sure where you get your calculation, because if you're building up
600 spaces times $50,000 is $32 million.
Well, I don't know where you get your calculation of $50,000, because if you're building up, this is a debate. This is not clarification of the motion.
This is a clarification. The number is not a number I've brought up. The cost for an underground space is at least 50, if not 60. And these spaces would have to be replaced underground.
Correct.
Therefore, 600 spaces times $50,000 is $30 million.
One would think that the value of the land was worth more than that, more than the parking spaces.
But if then it's not worth more than that, you understand that you're freezing the land and it remains a parking lot forever.
The intent of the motion is that if somebody's going, if a developer is going to build vertically, 25 stories, 15 stories, whatever, if they go vertically, or if it's mixed use or whatever, they would have a provision for residents of that building, and they would have to provide a provision for commuter parking within that
Equal to the number of spaces that were there.
That's correct.
And if those spaces, in this case, were 600 spaces,
they can still
that would be over $30 million.
Well, I take issue with your, but first of all, I take issue with your calculation.
You think you could build an underground space for less than $50,000?
Okay, Councillor Shiner, like clarification of the motion. Let's not.
Well, I am. I'm trying to understand and see if this motion
but the
actually
councillor has answered
freezes
the
land.
question.
Councillor, I gather if you wish to vote against the motion, which I suspect you do, you should just do so.
Okay, thank you. That was your last question. Councillor Karygiannis, clarification of the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was wondering if staff can put the motion up again, please.
It's right there in front of you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Appreciate that. Madam Speaker, through you to my colleague, would you like to see this extended to future parking lots that we might build? Madam Speaker, can you put my time on hold, please?
Councillor Davis, Councillor Bailao.
Councillor Karygiannis, the intent is that...
Councillor Davis, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to my colleague again, would you consider asking staff to come back with a policy that just doesn't look at what is happening today, but in the future, like any smart tracks / metro links that we might want to build? I mean, in my area, there's a Metrolinx that is coming up, and it has absolutely no parking. Would you consider allowing this in your motion?
I think that was intended, that sort of review was intended in Councillor Pasternak's motion.
Okay, thank you.
Now I'm going to get slapped.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll, clarification of the motion.
And thank you, Madam Speaker, because it is clarification. I'm trying to understand the terms here to see if this does in fact go as far as Councillor Shiner's concerns reflect. Include terms requiring the equivalent number of repurposed commuter lot spaces be replaced. What are repurposed commuter lot spaces?
The repurposing.
Repurposed commuter lot spaces.
So what that means is that it was a commuter lot, and it's being repurposed as mixed use or residential, the general area.
Oh, so the repurposing is of the land.
That's right. Yeah, and so the spaces otherwise wouldn't be there.
In any new development for commuter parking along that corridor. So where are the commuters going? What does the corridor mean?
The corridor is the Spadina University subway line. It refers to that or any other site. That's right. Okay,
and on any other site where commuter parking would be affected by redevelopment.
That's correct.
So my question is this: once they replace it, what kind of parking is it? Is it public parking, or is it you have to be going to the TTC? Is it for fee or otherwise? What do you envision?
The inference, you're right, it's not specific, but the inference is that commuter parking is generally TTC parking or Green P parking. Although it's not specific to that, the intent is not that it is private parking. Exorbitant private parking. I mean, the intent, you're quite correct, Councillor Carroll, it was not specific on the type of commuter parking, but commuter parking is generally affordable parking,
So you want to build $30 million worth of affordable parking midpoint on a subway line that actually goes all the way to Vaughan?
Well, I mean, I take issue with the numbers and the calculation, but the intent is that is that where we are at a potential loss of commuter parking, we still have to encourage people to use the TTC. And one of the best ways of encouraging people to use the TTCs is to get out of their cars by getting to these lots.
And my last question, I'm not sure I agree with that. I don't know whose study says it's the best way, but my last question is this. The $50,000 per spot, you know, that's real life, real time, 2 days cost of building an underground parking spot. It's not taken from thin air. It is the calculation that planning staff use to calculate what they are in fact asking of a developer when they require underground parking. 50,000 is right now, I believe, considered to be a soon-to-be out-of-date cost, and that in actual fact, in the next decade, the cost will be between 50 and 100,000.
Okay, Councillor Carroll, your question, please.
That is the question. Are you aware that that is a real-time, real-life calculation?
That question was already asked.
In planning policy.
And Councillor Carroll, that's probably why it's so costly to live in these condominiums, because the developers strictly build it into their model, into their pro forma. So it's all built into their cost of business.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
I am struggling to understand the intent.
The intent. Okay.
Just let me ask my question. So is your intent that if this passes, that Build Toronto, your understanding is that Build Toronto or the new real estate entity will be required to do this? Mandatory?
That's what the motion says, yes.
So you believe
that's my reading of my motion, yes.
With no information about the cost implications, no understanding of the planning context or the development capacity, all of those questions that are taken into consideration, you are directing that corporation to do this.
That's what the intention of the motion is, yes.
Okay, how foolish.
Okay, members of council, every member of council has the right to move a motion.
Thank you for the question.
And if you don't agree with it, you vote against it. You don't debate it and question why that motion was presented.
I don't need an apology. Thank you for the question.
Like, really? Like, if you don't agree with it, Councillor Davis, vote against it. Yes, personal privilege.
I would like to apologize for saying that. I thought I had turned off my mic, which of course we can't do anymore. I reached over and pushed my mic, so I apologize.
Thank you, Councillor Davis.
Okay, now let's just keep on topic here and ask questions on the motion. And if you don't agree, don't debate it. Councillor Holyday, clarification of the motion.
Thank you, Speaker. I will do my best. Through you to Councillor Campbell. Councillor Campbell, do you believe that these parking lots would be full and fully utilized and therefore a valuable asset?
Well, that's also not clarification of the motion. You know, with deference to my colleague from Etobicoke Centre. I mean, yes, I do believe that they'll be full, and in fact, we've lost quite a lot of spaces, and you know, they are in high demand.
There's a utility to what you're doing. Okay. Councillor Shiner brought up an interesting point that the replacement cost of the Wilson lot is $30 million. Is it the intent of your motion, perhaps, in looking at the big balance scale of public assets, that in this case something was sold and the taxpayers of Toronto lost a $30 million asset? It was evaporated into the ether because we know it's worth $30 million. So by replacing that asset through the development of these sites, we in fact keep the balance in balance, that the taxpayers aren't actually giving something up, a valuable public asset, which is a parking lot, worth X number of dollars, that balance scale stays in balance at the end of the development.
Absolutely, that's the intent. The intent is to protect the interests of tax-paying commuters.
And provide a utility which is obviously in demand because those lots are full day in and day out.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm done.
Thank you.
I can sit down now.
Councillor Carroll to speak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't have a motion to move. I will be voting against Councillor Campbell's motion. That won't come as a surprise. I was very concerned about the item to begin with, but I'm very happy with the amendments that we are in fact letting the real estate agency that we set up actually do their job, and that we're going to actually make them a part of this equation. So I'm grateful for that and will support Councillor Pasternak's motion. Madam Speaker, I have been supremely bummed since returning from the Asia Trade Mission. I spent a day after the delegation had finished trade work visiting transit stations that Mr. Byford had recommended that I visit. A suburban one was called Tama Plaza. It's a big rail station, has some commuter rail and some local subway, huge number of buses coming in and out to connect to that. And they have realized the value of the land that a transit station brings to a piece of land just beautifully, even though it is a suburban site. It's not right in the middle of town. But they have recognized what it means to have a long commute if you do choose to live in an exurb. And so as you get off the rail stations, and they have fare integration, as we too will have very soon. The first piece of fare integration was introduced today. That when people come in from a go line, we learned today from Minister Del Duca that the province is going to top up our transit fee and the rider will pay $1.50 less on the TTC fare. And that's the beginning. That's the first plank of fare integration. There's fare integration in Tokyo. So what happens is commuters get to the end of their first leg, and because they were allowed to realize and maximize the value of the land around that suburban station, they get off to lots of pickup retail. It's kind of retail that is, lifestyle stuff, quick groceries, quick this, quick that, my cleaner, my dentist, etc. Then there's a daycare center. Then there's a seniors drop-off where you can drop off the senior member of your family that needs care. There's all the things for your life that you're allowed to get out of the commuter rail and do, and then you go back down into the terminal and you connect to the bus. You connect to the lower orders of rail. You connect to the other modes to go the rest of your journey. And then at the end of that journey, of course, as we know, is the last mile or the last kilometer, whatever unit of measure. So it's about improving the journey along the way, maximizing the value of the land, and making sure that at the end of that line, we have enhanced transit enough that you are able to afford to run the transit system, capture some value at that land so you can run a transit system that gets you not within 2 kilometers of your home, but 1 or fewer kilometers within your home. And last but not least, when you get out of that transit, that we have the resources and the real estate to make sure that if you're getting out mobility challenged, every curb you're going to cross to get to your front door is an accessible curb. And on that, we're making great headway. That last mile journey, the pedestrian journey, we are making great headway. I don't know about you, but they were very busy in my ward this summer making accessible curbs for that last mile of a transit lifestyle. And whether we want to wrap our heads around it in 2009 or 2017, or you can't wrap your head around it until 2027, the reality is if we're going to be that municipality of 6 million, 8 million by 2030, we're talking now and talking about Wilson Station about Midtown. Not the suburbs. It will be Midtown by then. And up where the line ends in Vaughan, that will be the suburbs. So can we capture as much value in Wilson halfway along the line as possible? Can we maximize the value at the end of the line in Vaughan? That is the goal of our official plan, Vaughan's official plan, and the province's official plan. And it's on that basis that they're giving us the money to develop the transit we so badly need. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a motion that placed that City Council refer the item to the Toronto Realty Agency for consideration. The reason I do that is, I think, pretty clear. That is the body that will be dealing with issues like this. The whole reason, I think most people in this room, certainly those on executive committee who voted to advance this entity, it's for these exact reasons. How do we better coordinate real estate decisions that impact multiple agencies, multiple departments? Let's bring it to one place, one decision-making table, and we will make the best decision on how to best utilize these assets. I can feel for Councillor Pasternak in his local setting where, despite a decision being made years before he was even elected, the eventual closure had a significant negative impact. I think the reality is that, and I know people will say, well, it's different in the suburbs. I represent a suburban community with 3 subway stations in it. We want people to access transit by transit. That is the only answer that's going to make this city function, and so it's the reason why we collectively have, this council in the last 3 years, have spent billions and billions on TTC capital projects. What does that mean? In large part, that means more buses, and the operating subsidy we get from the city largely means extending service hours and the service range so that more buses can take people from their neighborhoods to subway stations. And so that's been a clear decision and trend of this council, decision after decision after decision, year after year. We've all collectively made those decisions, and I think those are good ones for the betterment of the city. For some of those people who have been using the Wilson lot, we know many of them do come from the north, Vaughan and beyond. Well, in that case, we're adding 4,500 spots to help them out. So maybe now they get on at York University, at 407, or at Pioneer Village, and they're on a brand new subway where they can get a seat, certainly right at the top of the line there, and ride comfortably down into the city. And so for that reason, I move that referral motion for your consideration. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. We do have a question.
Sure.
Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to my colleague. That only defers the decision to them. However, it doesn't give them guidelines as to what they should be considering. Should we not consider what we have now, what we might have in the future? For example, in my part of the world, there's an LRT station, a GO station that is planned on Finch. Originally, I see the plans with parking lot, and now I see plans without parking lot. I mean, just referring it is one way of getting rid of it, but it doesn't give them instructions at what they should be looking at.
The implicit in the mandate that you and I voted on for them gives them the instructions as how to deal with properties like this. And so that's part of their job. That's what we've told them to do. And so that's why I think this motion is sufficient as it is.
But I mean, deferring this will not give the community in my area where the GO station, the smart track that the mayor is proposing on putting, does not give them instructions to consult the constituents, does not get me involved. So, like, I mean, deferring it is one thing, but deferring it somewhere else, it's also a slow death.
No, I think you're quite incorrect there. What the mandate of that agency that you supported being implemented says is that they do have to do the consultation with communities when there are impacts, whether it be on a parking lot or development of a site that used to have a community center. That's exactly part of what the role of that agency is.
Would you be willing to add in there that we give them instructions on how to deal with this and how to look at it?
Again, the very language that we all approve for that agency speaks to that quite clearly in what we've directed them to do as an agency, and so I think this is sufficient.
Thank you.
Thank you. I disagree with you.
Okay, so we have a referral motion. If you want to speak on the referral, it's 2 minutes. Put your name up, request to question staff. Request to question staff, Councillor Perruzza. The other side. Okay, 2 minutes on the referral. Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to staff. I was wondering what assurances you can give us that when this motion is deferred, that the impact that would be felt in our immediate communities will be taken into consideration.
No, we're not asking questions. We're speaking on the referral.
Madam Speaker, I would not support the deferral for the simple reason that I don't think is at this moment appropriate, as we've got something which is on the table. Deferring it, referring it, it would only be a slow death. Not only that, but it's certainly not looking at the matter which right now that we need to make a decision in the affected community.
Okay. Councillor Perruzza on the referral, 2 minutes.
Yeah, Speaker, that would be like one of the dumbest things we ever did if we do that. And I'll tell you why it would be one of the dumbest things we ever did if we did that. Because just simply transferring these lands to the realty entity or Build Toronto or whoever it is, these parking lots get mothballed, basically get chain linked for years and years and years until they figure out what they can do with them. You'll lose the revenue on the parking, you lose everything, and you lose the ridership and the people that are using those parking lots to now use transit. You basically want to go down the wrong road, do that. It's nuts. No.
Councillor Shiner on the referral, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think the suggestion by my colleague, Councillor...
20 seconds, all right? Somebody say that. Oh, sorry.
Thank
20
you,
seconds.
Anthony. I think the referral is probably the appropriate move, and appreciate it on behalf of Councillor Cole. I know that Councillor Cole, as chair of the TTC, myself, at Build Toronto, and others are trying to even work now more comprehensively together to settle things, and my colleagues on Build know that as well because we're looking that way. The Toronto Realty Agency is one that's supposed to be empowered to look at all of our properties, and I think it's appropriate to send it over there. I say that and not knowing who's going to be on the board, knowing I won't be chair of the board because a councillor won't be chair of the new realty company, so it's not like I'm trying to take authority over anything in any way, but because that's the vision that we had at council. I also think it's right, which were the questions today, to look at a strategy to have some parking along commuter lines in areas, our subway lines, in areas out of the core. Because I know in the community that I represent, most of my residents are too far to walk to a subway station, even though we have it on Shepherd. They can't make it there. So they also want these lots, whether little lots or big lots. But I know that the recommendations that are here by my colleague, who I like very much, and I know is very thoughtful, Councillor Campbell, are completely misplaced. You're looking at replacing an above-ground space with a below-ground space, which is $50,000 to $60,000. And the cost of the parking to replace it is more than the whole lot is worth, never mind the cost for the parking for that building itself. So you'd sterilize the land. So we're trying to fashion a result on the go of a problem that's not being taken care of. And with that in mind, I think it's right to send it over there, to allow the agency to have a look at it. I think they should work with TTC and city planning, and I was looking at drafting a motion to send it off to them anyways, but I think you can try and ask that I should go forward, and there'll be 3 representatives on there from the city, whomever that might be,
Thank you. Your
who can
2
deal
minutes.
with it.
Your 2 minutes is up. Councillor Pasternak, 2 minutes on the referral.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I urge you to defeat referral. Built into my motion is actually a referral to both the TTC and the Chief Corporate Officer and Transition Lead for the citywide real estate program. This at least gives them direction. This gives them direction, as well as Councillor Campbell's motion to send it carte blanche over to the new real estate entity means that we have given them no direction on the thoughts of council. It is our role here to provide policy, to provide direction, to provide leadership. Therefore, I would urge you to defeat referral.
Okay, on the referral, recorded vote. Could you ring the bells? On the referral by Councillor Cole, recorded vote.
Councillor Fletcher, please. The referral carries 23 to 10.
Do we want, okay, members of council, we'll use the next few minutes to do quick releases and an introduction of some members' motions. Do we have any quick releases? Councillor Shiner.
So, Madam Speaker, I had held an item on page 6, CC 32.589 to 101 Roehampton Avenue, and my colleague who represents the area was fine with me releasing my hold, and he's going to put a hold on it and I think deal with it shortly after lunch anyways. So I'd like to release it, and I believe Councillor Matlow would like to hold it.
Okay, I can't hear. So on page 6, CC 32.5, you're giving it to Councillor Matlow?
Yeah, I'm just going to release it to Councillor Matlow, and I think he'll just deal with it later.
All right, that's fine.
And is my item ever ready for introduction?
I don't know. I'll have to find out. No. Councillor Wong Tam, quick release.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. On page 5, TE 26.11, 25 Ontario Street and 280 King Street East, zoning amendment application and final report. I do have a motion that's been prepared by planning staff. If the clerks can put that on the screen, we're ready to release it and have it adopted. And then I have another one after this, Madam Speaker.
Okay, it's on the screen. That's on page 5, T 2611. Councillor Wong Tam is releasing, and the motion is on the screen. All in favor? Recorded vote.
And then one day, 10, 15 years later, somebody will say, what did you guys do?
Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong, please.
Councillor Cressy, please. And Councillor DiCiano, please.
Councillor Shiner, when you're seated, please. Councillor Perruzza, please.
It's staff's. It was circulated on Monday.
The amendment carries 34 to 1.
Item as amended, all in favor? Carried. Councillor Wong Tam.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. On page 5 also, T 26.30, 307 Sherburne Street, official plan amendment, zoning amendment application. Once again, the amendment was circulated in advance, and the clerks can put that on the screen as well. Thank you.
Okay, if we can put, it's on the screen. Page 5, T 2630. Councillor Wong Tam is releasing with the amendment. All in favor? Recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor Carroll, Councillor Thompson, please.
Councillor Fillion, please. And Councillor Ford, please.
The amendment carries unanimously, 35 in favor.
Item as amended, all in favor? Carried. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to release on page 3, GM 22.27, changes to the on-street paid parking rates and hours of operation. I'm going to release that like a recorded vote because I'd like to vote in the negative.
Okay, on page 3, GM 2227, Councillor Campbell is releasing, is asking for recorded vote.
Councillor Crisanti, please.
Councillor Davis, please.
The motion carries 26 to 9.
Okay. Councillor Cressy?
Sorry, Speaker. I voted incorrectly there.
Pardon?
I voted incorrectly and I wanted to redo my...
So you want to reopen it? Okay, motion by Councillor Cressy to reopen. On favor, carried. Okay, so we'll do another vote. Recorded vote on the item. This is the item, yeah.
Councillor Palacio, please. Thank you.
Councillor McMahon, please. My side.
The item is adopted 23 to 12.
Councillor Cressy.
Thank you, Speaker. On page 5, item TE 26.14, designation of the King Spadina Heritage Conservation District.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
That's all right.
Okay,
on
go.
page 5,
Yes?
TE 26.14, designation of the King Spadina Heritage Conservation District. I'm prepared to release that.
Okay, on page 5.
Councillor Grimes would like a recorded vote.
On page 5, T 2614, Councillor Cressy is releasing. Recorded vote.
Councillor Palacio, please. Councillor Crisanti, please. Councillor Mihevik and Councillor Fillion, please.
Councillor Wong-Tam, please. Councillor McMahon. Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor Davis. Councillor Karygiannis, please.
The item is adopted 32 to 3.
Councillor Cressy, your member's motion 3249 for the liquor license has been circulated. Do you want to just move it? Okay. MM 3249, all in favor? Carried. MM 3250, Councillor Cole. I'm sorry, Councillor Matlow. Would you like to move that member's motion?
Yes, please.
Yes? Okay, that's on the protecting tenants. On favor? Carried. Okay. Yes. Councillor Carmichael Greb, you have a motion you want to introduce?
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And this is urgent to ensure that no more little lending libraries have notices given for them. Thank you.
On favor? Carried. Okay, the next one. Councillor Wong Tam.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to introduce this particular motion because it's time specific. The event is already booked at Nathan Phillips Square. We are all going to learn how to bobsled, and it's coming out very shortly.
Okay, on favor, carried. That's it. Councillor Bailao. Oh, you're not here.
I'll move it for her.
Councillor McMahon, do you want to move it? Councillor Perks is the seconder. Councillor Perks, do you want to move it?
With relish and pleasure.
Okay. All in favor? Carried. That's it. Okay, members, recess to 2 o'clock. Thank you.